I never thought I would live to see the day my own son stood in the kitchen. I had cooked 1,000 meals and told me, quietly, like he was discussing the weather, that it might be time to think about my future. Not our future. My future. As if I had suddenly become a problem to be managed, rather than a mother to be loved. His name is Adrian, and the woman standing just behind him, one hand resting on the counter, that my late husband Gerald built himself on a long August weekend, was his wife, Petra. I am 67 years old. I have lived in this house in Stratford, Ontario for 31 years. Gerald and I bought it the spring after we were married, when the maple trees along the street were just beginning to bud, and the whole town smelled like possibility. It was a modest house. 2 stories, a covered porch, a backyard deep enough for a vegetable garden, and a fire pit we never quite got around to building. Gerald called it our forever house the day we signed the papers. He said it like a promise. He always kept his promises. Gerald passed 3 years ago. Pancreatic cancer. It moves fast, they told us. They were right. After he died, I learned to fill the silence with small things. Morning tea on the porch. The CBC playing softly in the kitchen. Letters to old friends. The garden Gerald had loved, but could never quite keep up with. I kept it up for him, the way you do things for people who are no longer there to see them. I was not falling apart. I want to be clear about that. I was grieving. Yes, but I was managing. I paid my bills on time. I drove myself to appointments. I had friends who came for dinner, neighbors who checked in. A life that was quieter than it once was, but still mine. Before I tell you what happened after Adrian and Petra moved into my house, I want to ask you something. If someone you loved, truly loved, had sacrificed for, had worried over every single day since they were born, tried to quietly take everything you had left, what would you have done? Tell me in the comments. I read everyone. Gerald and I were not wealthy people. He worked as a millwright at a manufacturing plant outside of town for 26 years. I worked at Stratford Public Library part-time for most of our marriage, and then full-time after the children were grown. We were careful people. We clipped grocery coupons. We drove cars until they refused to start. We took one trip every few years, usually to visit family in New Brunswick, and we called it a vacation, and meant it. The house was paid off by the time Gerald was diagnosed. That was something, at least. One less thing to worry about while the world was rearranging itself into something unrecognizable. We had 2 children. Adrian was the older one, serious and methodical from boyhood, the kind of child who read the instructions before opening anything. Our daughter, Simone, lives in Vancouver now with her partner and their 2 children. She calls every Sunday without fail. And when Gerald died, she flew out and stayed for 3 weeks and held my hand through things I do not know how I would have survived without her. Adrian came for the funeral and stayed 4 days. I do not say that as an accusation. I say it because it is true, and because truth, I have learned, matters even when it is uncomfortable. The distance between Adrian and me had been growing for years before Gerald died, not dramatically. No single argument, no defining moment, just a slow withdrawal, like a tide going out, so gradually you do not notice until you are standing on dry sand, wondering where the water went. He called less. When he did call, the conversations were polite but brief. He asked whether I needed anything. I always said no, because I was afraid that saying yes might burden him. Petra, I had always found difficult to read. She was pleasant enough in person, careful with her words, the kind of woman who could smile through anything and leave you uncertain whether she was genuinely happy or simply very controlled. She worked in commercial real estate in Kitchener. She was good at it, I understood. She had a way of looking at a space and seeing something other than what was already there. I should have noticed that earlier. The phone call came on a Thursday evening in October. Adrian's voice was warm, in a way it had not been in some time. He said he and Petra had been thinking about me, alone in the house through the winter, and that they were worried. He said the drive from Kitchener was only about an hour, and they had been talking about whether it might make sense to consolidate, his word, consolidate, for a while. Petra's lease on her office space was ending. Adrian was doing most of his work remotely now. It would be temporary, he said, just to help. He said the thing that I suspect he knew would reach me, that their son, My grandson, Elliot, would love to spend more time with me. Elliot was 14 then. Lanky and quiet and obsessed with building things, model planes at first, then circuitry, then small robots that he entered in competitions at school. He had Gerald's patience and none of Adrian's reserve. When Elliot hugged me, he actually hugged me, with his whole self, the way children do before the world teaches them to hold back. I said yes because of Elliot, but also because it was October, and the house was very quiet, and I missed the sound of other people moving through rooms. They arrived on a Saturday morning. A moving van and 2 cars, and Elliot bounding up the front walk like he owned the season. He wrapped his arms around me and said, "Grandma Bev, I'm going to fix that dripping tap in the bathroom. I've watched videos. I know how." And I laughed for the first time in what felt like weeks. Adrian shook my hand. He actually shook my hand. I remember thinking that was strange, and then telling myself I was being too sensitive. Petra smiled and handed me a potted orchid. "For the house," she said. Then she looked past me into the front hallway, with an expression I could not quite name. Not wonder exactly, something more like calculation. The first weeks were almost good. Adrian fixed things around the house without being asked. Elliot and I spent Saturday afternoons at the kitchen table, him teaching me about circuitry, and me teaching him to make Gerald's shortbread recipe, which involves more butter than anyone should be comfortable with. Petra was quiet and courteous and occasionally cooked dinner, which she did well and with a certain efficiency that suggested cooking was a task she respected but did not enjoy. I slept better those first weeks, not because anything had changed, but because the house had noise again. And noise, after 3 years of silence, felt something like grace. But small things began to shift. The first was so minor I almost did not mention it to anyone. Petra rearranged the pantry. I came downstairs one morning to find everything reorganized by category, labels facing forward, the expired items removed. She had left a small note on the counter, cleared a few things out. "Hope that's okay." It was practical. It was also, somehow, a declaration. Then she mentioned the living room furniture. It was dated, she said, not in a mean way, just observationally, the way she might note that a property needed updating. I said I liked it. She said she understood, then changed the subject. The furniture stayed, but I noticed her looking at it differently after that, the way people look at things they have already decided to replace. Gerald's reading chair was moved 2 weeks later. It had sat in the corner of the living room for 15 years, angled toward the window, positioned exactly as Gerald had preferred it because the afternoon light came in from the left and did not create a glare. When I came downstairs one morning, it had been pushed against the far wall to make room for a new floor lamp Adrian had ordered online. "It was blocking the flow," Petra said. I stood in the doorway and looked at the chair against the wrong wall and felt something shift inside me that I could not name. "Gerald liked it where it was," I said. "I know," she said, "but Gerald's not here anymore." The words were not said cruelly. They were said practically, which somehow made them worse. I moved the chair back that afternoon while they were out. When they returned, no one said anything. But the next morning, it was against the wall again. That was the first time I called my friend Frances Okafor. Frances had been my closest friend for 22 years. She lived 4 blocks away and had been a social worker for 30 years before she retired. She had a way of seeing situations clearly without telling you how to feel about them, which I had always valued and now needed desperately. I told her about the chair. She listened without interrupting. "Bev," she said when I had finished, "that's not about a chair." I knew she was right. The pattern continued. Petra introduced a cleaning schedule, printed and posted on the refrigerator, without asking me. She hired a lawn service to come on Fridays, canceling the arrangement I had with my neighbor's teenage son who needed the money. She redirected the mail carrier to leave packages at the side door. She rearranged the storage in the basement. Each thing, taken alone, was defensible, helpful, even. Together, they amounted to something else entirely. Adrian said nothing. When I raised it with him once, gently, he said Petra was just trying to help. He said it the way he used to say the dog just wants to play when the dog knocked someone over. Then came the conversation about the bedroom. It started the same way those conversations always started. Petra framing something as a logistical observation rather than a request. She and Adrian were in the master bedroom at the end of the hall. Elliot had the small room near the stairs. I was in the room Gerald and I had shared for 31 years. The thing is, Petra said one evening, sitting across from me at the kitchen table with a cup of tea she had made herself without offering me one. The layout makes more sense the other way around. We're both working from home now. We need the closet space. And honestly, the room at the front of the house would suit you better. More natural light in the morning, quieter street view. I looked at her. That's my bedroom, I said. I know it is. She smiled. But you know how houses work. The arrangement that makes sense changes when the people change. I thought of Gerald. Of 31 years of watching the same patch of backyard through the same window. Of the closet that still held, on the top shelf, a shoebox of his letters. I told her I needed time to think about it. She and Adrian moved their things in 4 days later, while I was having lunch at Francis's house. I came home to find my clothes neatly folded in the room at the front. Gerald's shoebox was on the dresser. His bedside clock was gone entirely. When I asked about it, Petra said she had moved it to the storage room because the ticking kept Adrian awake. I sat on the edge of the unfamiliar bed and held the shoebox and did not cry. Not yet. Crying felt like accepting something I had not yet agreed to. What followed was the slow erosion of a life. The combination on the garage door keypad was changed after Petra said the old code was too simple. I was told the new one but forgot it once, briefly. And when I knocked on the front door because my key was inside, no one answered for 8 minutes. I stood on my own front porch in November, waiting to be let into my own house. Petra began referring to the house in ways that started small and grew larger. When we redecorate, she said once, to someone on the phone. Then, to Adrian's colleague who visited for dinner. We've been here almost 6 months now, getting it sorted out. Getting it sorted out. As if the house had been a problem before their arrival. She took the family photographs off the front hallway wall. Not all of them. Just repositioned them, she said. The large portrait of Gerald and me at our 30th anniversary dinner ended up in the hallway bathroom. Our wedding photo went into a box she left on the counter in the storage room, next to the camping gear and the Christmas decorations. Francis noticed before I said anything. She came for tea one afternoon and walked through the front door and stopped. Where did your photos go? Repositioned, I said. Francis looked at me for a long moment. Bev, you need to talk to someone. By someone, she meant a lawyer. I had not thought about lawyers since Gerald died. We had updated our wills together the year before his diagnosis, as part of that vaguely superstitious tidying that couples do when they start to feel mortal. Our lawyer had been a woman named Eleanor Bryce, who worked out of an old Victorian building on Ontario Street and had the kind of quiet competence that makes you trust someone immediately. Gerald had insisted on meeting with Eleanor twice more after his diagnosis. I had attended both meetings in a fog of grief and fear, holding his hand, signing where they told me to sign. He had been thorough, methodical, careful. That was Gerald. He never left things to chance. I had not opened the file folder where I kept our legal documents since the week after he died. The night after Francis left, I took that folder from the locked drawer in my bedroom. The old bedroom. The front room. The room they had moved me to. And I sat at the small desk and opened it. Inside were copies of our wills, property tax records, the mortgage satisfaction letter, insurance documents, and several envelopes I did not remember seeing before. And then I found it. A sealed envelope with my name written on it in Gerald's handwriting. Beverly. I held it for a long time, without opening it. Gerald had beautiful handwriting, precise and unhurried, the handwriting of someone who took small things seriously. Just seeing it made my chest ache in a way that had become familiar and had not gotten easier. I did not open it that night. I was not ready. But I read the other documents. And what I found in them, in the formal, careful language that Eleanor had drafted and Gerald had signed, told me something I had not known. Something neither Adrian nor Petra knew, either. Gerald had not simply left me the house in his will. There was something more. The next morning, I called Eleanor Bryce's office. Her receptionist recognized my name. Eleanor called back within the hour. Beverly, she said warmly. I was wondering when you might call. You were expecting me. A pause. Gerald asked me to make sure you knew to call, if anything ever felt wrong. He was very specific about that. I felt the back of my throat tighten. It feels wrong, I said. Come in, she said, as soon as you can. I did not tell Adrian I was going. I simply said I had errands. He did not look up from his laptop. Eleanor's office looked exactly as I remembered it. Dark wood, law books, a small lamp that gave the room a warm, amber light. She stood when I walked in and shook my hand with both of hers. Tell me everything, she said. So I did. The bedroom, the photos, the combination, the comments to strangers about the house, the power of attorney documents Adrian had mentioned, casually, at dinner 2 weeks ago, almost as an aside, almost as if it were simply a formality. Eleanor listened. She took notes. She did not interrupt. When I finished, she set down her pen. Gerald was worried this might happen, she said. He knew? He didn't know. But he was careful. She opened a file on her desk, his name on the tab, next to mine. Before he died, Gerald and I restructured several things specifically to protect you. Not because he distrusted Adrian, but because grief, and property, and family sometimes produce situations that people do not anticipate. She explained what she had done. The house was not simply mine in the ordinary sense. Gerald had established a legal structure, common under Ontario estate law, that protected the property against transfer, refinancing, or sale without a specific process. Any power of attorney, regardless of how it was worded, could not override the protections already in place. Independent legal review was required. There were specific verification steps. Eleanor had advised Gerald on all of it, and Gerald had signed every document with the same quiet thoroughness he brought to everything. No one can pressure you out of this house, Eleanor said. Not legally, not without your fully informed, independently verified consent. I looked at the documents. The words blurred slightly. There's something else, Eleanor said. She told me that approximately 4 months ago, someone had called her office asking questions about property transfer procedures for an estate. The caller had not identified themselves as a client. They asked general questions, framed as research, she said. She had declined to provide information. Do you know who called? I asked. She looked at me steadily. We traced the number. It was registered to Petra's realty brokerage. The room went very quiet. I thought of the orchid Petra had handed me at the front door. For the house. I drove home slowly. I stopped at Frances's on the way and sat in her kitchen and told her everything. Frances wrapped her hands around her tea mug and was quiet for a moment. Then she said, she called a lawyer before they even moved in. Yes. Frances looked at me. Bev. She planned this. I had known it. I had felt it building for months, in the repositioned furniture and the changed combinations, and the way Petra talked about the house in the future tense, as if its current state were only temporary. But hearing it said plainly, by someone I trusted, made it real in a way I had not allowed it to be. Will you be a witness? I asked. If Eleanor needs one. Frances set down her mug. Gerald sat with me through my divorce, she said. Tell Eleanor I'll be there. I opened his letter that night. Gerald's handwriting filled both sides of a single sheet of paper. He wrote the way he spoke. Careful, without waste, with that particular warmth he reserved for things that mattered. My dear Bev, he wrote. If you're reading this, something has happened that made you feel uncertain about your place in our home. I know you. I know you'll have spent months trying not to cause trouble, trying to smooth things over, trying to believe the best. That's one of the things I have always loved about you. It's also the thing I have always worried about. I pressed my hand to my mouth. He continued, you do not owe anyone this house. Not because of what they need. Not because of blood. Not because someone has made you feel guilty for holding on to it. You and I built that house into a home together. That means something. Don't let anyone tell you it doesn't. If something feels wrong, call Eleanor. She knows what to do. And don't sign anything. Not without her beside you. Trust yourself. By the time I finished reading, I was crying openly, sitting alone in the small front bedroom in the dark, holding a letter from a man who had known me well enough to write exactly what I needed to hear. I missed him so much I could barely breathe, but beneath the grief, something else, something steadier, a direction. The next 2 weeks, I did what Eleanor advised. I observed. I documented. I said very little. I watched Petra move through the house with the confidence of someone who believes the conclusion is already written. And I let her believe that Elliot still knocked on my door in the evenings. He brought tea once, a little too milky, the way he always made it, and sat on the floor of the front room and showed me a small motor he was building for a school competition. I sat across from him and felt the particular gratitude of being loved straightforwardly by someone who does not have an agenda. One evening he looked around the room and said, quietly, "You shouldn't be in here. This used to be the guest room." "I know," I said. He looked at me. "It's not right." I touched his shoulder. "It will be." He nodded, serious, in the way teenagers are when they are trying to absorb something too large for them. Before he left, he said, "I heard them arguing last night about money." I kept my expression neutral. "It happens." He hesitated then. "Dad said things weren't going to last much longer, that they needed something to change soon." Something to change. I thought of Petra's call to Eleanor's office, of the real estate brochures I had found in the recycling bin, marked with a property in Guelph, of the way Adrian had mentioned the power of attorney twice in 2 weeks. Always casually, always as though it were simply sensible housekeeping. Something to change. I went to the bank the following morning, updated my contact information, reviewed my accounts, removed Adrian from the notification list he had been added to after Gerald's death, something I had not noticed until Eleanor pointed it out. The teller was a woman who had known Gerald. She looked at me carefully. "Everything all right, Beverly?" "Getting there," I said. That evening, I came home to find Adrian sitting alone in the kitchen. No laptop, no phone, just sitting. He looked tired in a way that went beyond a bad night's sleep. "Mom," he said. I sat across from him. "Petra and I have been talking," he started. "I know," I said. He paused. "We'd like to sit down together, have a proper conversation. The three of us." "All right," I said. "Whenever you're ready." He looked surprised by my calmness. That was fine. Let him be surprised. The meeting happened on a Sunday afternoon, the kind of cold, bright October day that looks like hope from a window and bites like disappointment the moment you step outside. Adrian had set up the kitchen table formally, with papers arranged in a folder and 2 mugs of tea placed with the careful deliberateness someone managing a negotiation. Petra sat beside Adrian. I sat across from them. "We want to start by saying this comes from a place of genuine concern," Petra said. I nodded. "We're worried about your long-term situation," Adrian said. "Living alone, the upkeep of the house, planning for the future." "I'm not living alone," I said. "You're here." A pause, then Petra, "Right. But that arrangement isn't necessarily permanent." There it was. "What we're proposing," Adrian said, sliding the folder toward me, "is a power of attorney. Financial. Just as a safeguard, so that if anything ever happened, we could manage things without unnecessary complications." I looked at the documents, neatly prepared, professionally formatted. "And the house?" I said. Adrian cleared his throat. "The house would need to be considered as part of any long-term plan." "Considered how?" Petra answered. "Properties like this require ongoing maintenance, and as circumstances change, it might make sense to think about whether this is the right fit for everyone going forward." The right fit. My house, my 31-year home. A question of fit. "There's a retirement community," Adrian said carefully. "In Guelph, very well regarded. Petra has a contact there." The words landed with a quiet finality, like the last snow of winter. There was no way to pretend I had not heard them, and no point in pretending I was surprised. I looked at my son. I thought of him at 8 years old, sitting in this kitchen, eating toast, talking about the hockey game the night before. I thought of Gerald watching him grow up in this house, marking his height on the doorframe in the upstairs halls. Those marks still there, still visible under the paint Adrian had suggested covering over. Then I thought of Eleanor. "I'll need to have my lawyer review these documents," I said. Petra's expression tightened briefly. "Of course," she said. "Before I sign anything." "That's very reasonable," she said. Adrian nodded, visibly relieved. He thought my calmness meant agreement. He thought the meeting had gone well. That evening, Elliot knocked on my door again. He came in and sat on the floor without being invited, the way comfortable people do. "How did it go?" he asked. I looked at him. You know about the meeting? He shrugged. I'm 14, not oblivious, despite everything. I almost smiled. Did they ask you to say something? I said. He was quiet for a moment. Then, Dad mentioned I should talk to you. Tell you it was a good idea. He picked at the carpet. I said no. The simple dignity of that. I said no. Thank you, I said. He looked up. Mom's been working on this for a long time, Grandma Bev. Before we even moved here. My stomach tightened. What do you mean? I heard her on the phone. Right after Grandpa Gerald died, she was talking to someone about what happens to a house when one spouse dies and the other gets older. He swallowed. I didn't really understand it then. I do now. I held that for a long moment. Elliot, I said, I need you to know something. What? None of this is your fault, and none of it will change how I feel about you. He looked at the floor. Then, very quietly, I know. That's why I'm telling you. Eleanor had advised me to let things come to a head naturally. People reveal themselves, she had said, when they believe they have already won. The confrontation came 3 days later, and it came the way real things often do. Not in the shape you expected, but in the one that was waiting for you all along. Petra had invited 2 colleagues over for dinner, a woman named Sandra from her brokerage, and a man named Glenn who, it emerged during the appetizers, was a senior advisor at a property management firm in Waterloo. I had made soup, a butternut squash soup that Gerald loved, the kind that takes 3 hours if you do it properly, and is the kind of thing that fills a house with warmth from the inside out. When Petra came into the kitchen and saw the pot on the stove, something flickered across her face. Oh, she said, I thought we'd keep it simple tonight. I ordered from that Thai place. You didn't mention that, I said. I thought it was obvious. It was not obvious, but I said nothing. At dinner, I sat at the end of the table. Not the head, where I had sat for 3 decades, but the end nearest the kitchen, where Adrian had quietly suggested I sit because it was more practical for clearing plates. Glenn asked about the house early in the meal. How long had we had it? What had been updated recently? Had we thought about the market? Petra answered all of these questions. We bought it a few years ago, she said. We've been doing updates. The market here is strong. We bought it. Sandra turned to me with a friendly smile. It's so nice that Petra and Adrian could take you in. My mother-in-law was on her own for years before we finally found her a proper place. Such a relief when it all comes together. Take you in. I set down my spoon. Elliot, who was sitting beside me, went very still. I looked across the table at Petra, waiting for her to correct the assumption. Waiting for my daughter-in-law to say, actually, this is Beverly's house. Gerald and Beverly built this together. We are guests here. Petra lifted her wine glass instead. Actually, I said. The table went quiet. This is my home. Gerald and I bought it in 1993. I have lived here for 31 years. Adrian looked at me sharply. Petra set down her glass. Glenn blinked. Oh, I apologize. I misunderstood the situation. Not at all, I said. It seems there has been some confusion about that lately. The sentence landed where I intended it to. Petra's jaw tightened. Adrian looked at the table. Petra excused herself to check on something in the kitchen. Adrian followed a moment later. I heard her voice, low and controlled. Something about making a scene. Something about his not doing this tonight. When they returned, the dinner continued, but the air had changed. After the guests left, Petra waited until Elliot had gone upstairs. Then she turned to me. That was unnecessary, she said. What was unnecessary? Correcting Sandra, making a point in front of Glenn. I was telling the truth, I said. You embarrassed us. I looked at her steadily. I told guests that this is my house. That is a true statement. Adrian, standing in the doorway, said nothing. Petra crossed her arms. You know what the situation is. We've had these conversations. The house needs to be part of a plan. What plan? I said. Whose plan? I have not agreed to any plan. You will, she said. And then, with a certainty that I recognized as the voice of someone who believes they have already arranged the outcome, it's just a matter of time. I stood up from the table. Petra, I said, I want to ask you something. She waited. Who did you call? About 4 months before you moved here. About property transfer procedures after a spouse passes. The silence that followed was absolute. Petra's face did not crumble. She was not a person whose face crumbled. But something in her went very still, The way a person goes still when they realize a conversation has moved beyond the territory they prepared for. "I don't know what you're talking about," she said. "I think you do." Adrian looked from Petra to me. For the first time I saw something in his expression that had not been there before. Uncertainty. Petra reached for a different approach. "You're upset," she said. "You've been under a lot of stress. Grief affects people's. The law firm told me," I said. 3 words, that was all. Petra stopped. Adrian said, very quietly, "Petra." She looked at him. "You called Eleanor Bryce's office," I said. "Before you moved in. You were asking about what you could do with this house. She did not give you the information, but she kept a record." The room was completely quiet. Then Adrian said it again, his voice different now, lower, the way voices go when something is being unraveled. "Petra, did you call a lawyer before we moved in?" She did not answer, and that not answer said everything. Adrian sat down heavily in one of the kitchen chairs. He put his hand over his face. I watched my son understand, in real time, something that I had already understood for weeks. I said, very calmly, "I want you both to know that Gerald was not simply leaving me a house. He was leaving me a protection. I won't be signing any power of attorney. I won't be moving to Guelph or anywhere else. And I would like this house, my house, to be treated accordingly." Then the front door opened. Eleanor Bryce walked in. I had given her a key that morning. She was carrying her briefcase and wearing her coat, and she looked exactly like someone who had been doing this for 30 years and was not remotely surprised by the situation she had walked into. Adrian looked up. Petra looked at Eleanor and then at me. "I think," Eleanor said, setting her briefcase on the kitchen table with a quiet precision, "that we should all sit down." What followed was not a shouting match. It was something quieter and more devastating than that. A methodical laying out of facts. Eleanor explained the structure Gerald had put in place. She explained what it protected and what it prevented. She explained that any power of attorney would have no authority over the decisions that mattered, that no sale or transfer could proceed without a process that included independent legal counsels and multiple verification steps. She slid a document across the table to Petra. Petra read it. Her face gave nothing away, but her hands were not quite still. "There's one more thing," Eleanor said. She removed another page from her folder. "Mr. Okafor, Francis's husband, who is an accountant, reviewed some public filings at my request, nothing private, but enough to indicate that there have been significant financial difficulties on your end in the past 18 months. Adrian looked up. "2 failed business ventures," Eleanor said, not unkindly, just precisely. "Several outstanding obligations. A line of credit that has reached its limit." The kitchen was very quiet. Adrian said, "How did you public record?" Eleanor said, "CRA filings, business registration records, nothing improper." He looked at Petra. "How much?" he said. She looked away. "Petra, how much?" What came out in the silence of my kitchen, in the house that Gerald built into a home, was the truth. Not all at once, but enough. The investments that had failed, the debt that had accumulated, the plan, Petra's plan, initially, though Adrian had known more than he had admitted to himself, to gain control of the property, sell it, and use the proceeds to start over. He had told himself it was temporary. He had told himself I would be better off. He had told himself a great many things. Adrian put his hands flat on the table and looked at them for a long time. Then Francis knocked on the back door and let herself in, because I had told her what time things were likely to reach this point. She sat down beside me without ceremony. She looked at Adrian, then at Petra, then at Eleanor. "I've known Beverly for 22 years, she said. "I've watched what has happened in this house since you moved in. I watched Gerald's chair moved against the wrong wall. I watched the photographs disappear. I'm happy to say so in any context that requires it." Petra stood. "This is over," Eleanor said quietly. "That's what it is." The days that followed were painful in the particular way that things are painful when they are necessary. Petra left first. Not dramatically, not that night, but the following weekend, taking her things in the methodical way she did everything. She did not apologize. I did not expect her to. Adrian stayed for another 2 weeks. We barely spoke. I did not push. Some things need room to settle before they can be addressed. Then one morning, I came downstairs and found him sitting at the kitchen table with a cup of coffee. Not working, just sitting. The way you sit when you are not running from something for the first time in a long time. "Mom," he said. I sat across from him. He was quiet for a moment. Then, I told myself I was helping. "I know," I said. "That's the worst part." He looked up. I almost believed it. I looked at my son, the serious, methodical boy. The man who had let the tide go out so far that he had almost lost himself in it. "Did you know," I asked, "about Petra's call to Eleanor before you moved in?" He was quiet for a long time. "I didn't ask," he said finally. "I think I knew enough that I chose not to ask." That was its own kind of honesty, and I held it accordingly. We talked for nearly 2 hours. About Gerald. About the distance that had grown between us and how it had grown. About Petra and the financial pressures Adrian had minimized, and then hidden, and then stopped looking at directly. About what it meant to mistake solutions for love. He cried once, briefly, while talking about Gerald. I let him. "I'm going to need time," I said, "before I trust you the way I used to." "I know," he said, "but I'm not closing the door." He nodded. He looked relieved and devastated in equal measure, which seemed right. Adrian left a few days later. Elliot stayed another week, at my invitation, finishing his school term from the house, while Adrian sorted out temporary accommodations. On the last morning, Elliot made breakfast. Slightly burnt toast and eggs that were more scrambled than intended, and we ate together at the kitchen table and talked about his robotics competition and whether he thought his team had a chance. He carried his bag to the front door and hugged me the way he always had, with his whole self. "Will you come see the competition?" he said. "It's in November." "Try to stop me," I said. He grinned, and then he was gone. The house went quiet again, but it was a different quiet this time. I moved Gerald's chair back to its corner, angled toward the window, where the afternoon light came in from the left without any glare. I rehung our wedding photo in the front hallway where it belonged. I put the anniversary portrait back in the living room, in the spot where I could see it from the kitchen table. Then I sat down in Gerald's chair and held his letter and looked out the window at the garden. Our forever house, he had called it. He always kept his promises. It had been a year since everything came to a head when Adrian called to say he was getting help. Financial counseling, therapy. He asked, carefully, whether we might have dinner sometime. I said yes. Simone had already been calling every Sunday, but now she called more often, shorter calls, just to check in, just to say she was thinking of me. She said she was sorry she had been so far away. I told her she had been exactly where she needed to be, and that being a good daughter is not measured in kilometers. Elliot texted me about the competition. His team came second. He sent a photograph of himself holding a small trophy, grinning, his hair exactly as it always was. I kept the photo on the kitchen windowsill. Eleanor updated my estate documents. Clear, simple, no room for misunderstanding. Frances witnessed everything, sitting across from me at Eleanor's desk with her hands folded and her expression as steady as it had always been. Afterward, we went for lunch at a small restaurant near the market. Frances ordered the soup. I ordered the soup. We talked about things that had nothing to do with any of this. Her granddaughter's first steps, the new exhibit at the gallery, whether the garden center on Ontario Street would have tulip bulbs in yet, small things. The kind of things that make up a life. On the drive home, I stopped in front of the house for a moment before going in. The October light was doing something beautiful to the maple trees along the street. The porch light was on because I had left it on that morning, and it made the front door look warm and solid and exactly like what it was, mine. Not because I had fought for it, not because I had won something, but because Gerald and I had built something real here, something layered with years and care, and the particular weight of a life genuinely shared. They had tried to make me feel like a guest. For a while, they had come close to succeeding. But a guest is someone who has not yet earned her place. I had spent 31 years earning mine, and in the end, that was not something anyone could simply take. I went inside. I put the kettle on. I sat down in Gerald's chair, and for the first time in a very long time, the quiet felt like mine.